The dust swirled around Jeremiah Hawthorne's weathered boots as he stood on the porch of his failing ranch, watching the bank assessors load their black carriage with documents that would seal his fate. It was the summer of 1873, and the drought had lasted 3 brutal years, turning his once thriving cattle operation into a graveyard of sun-bleached bones and broken dreams. The Hawthorne Ranch had been in his family for 2 generations, carved from the unforgiving Texas plains by his grandfather's calloused hands, but now it seemed destined to slip away like sand through his fingers. Jeremiah was a tall, broad-shouldered man of 35, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He had never married, dedicating every waking moment to the ranch that had been his inheritance and his burden. The local women had long since given up their attempts to court him, understanding that his heart belonged to the land and the cattle that grazed upon it. But now, with foreclosure looming and his debts mounting like tumbleweeds against a fence, he faced the unthinkable prospect of losing everything his family had built. The situation was desperate beyond measure. The bank had given him 60 days to settle his debts or face eviction, and the sum required was staggering. $23,000, more money than most men would see in a lifetime. His cattle had died or been sold off at bargain prices, his remaining hands had drifted away to find work elsewhere, and the few neighbors who might have helped were struggling with their own survival in the harsh economic climate that had gripped the region. It was on a particularly scorching afternoon, when the heat waves rose from the parched earth like ghostly dancers, that Jeremiah received an unexpected visitor. A small woman approached his ranch on foot, carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel and wearing a simple brown dress that had seen better days. As she drew closer, Jeremiah realized she was what polite society would call a little person, standing no taller than 4 feet, but carrying herself with a dignity and purpose that commanded respect. Her name was Margaret O'Sullivan, and she was unlike anyone Jeremiah had ever encountered. Born in Ireland to a family of modest means, she had immigrated to America as a young woman with dreams of building a new life in the land of opportunity. What she lacked in physical stature, she more than made up for in intelligence, determination, and an uncanny ability to see potential where others saw only problems. She had worked as a seamstress, a bookkeeper, and even briefly as a teacher in various frontier towns, always moving westward in search of something she couldn't quite name. Margaret had heard about Jeremiah's predicament through the intricate network of gossip that connected every small town and isolated ranch across the territory. More importantly, she had heard about the rich oil deposits that lay beneath much of the land in the region, information that had come to her through a geologist she had befriended during her travels. The man had mentioned specifically that the Hawthorne Ranch sat atop what could potentially be one of the largest oil reserves in Texas, though this knowledge was not yet common among the local population. When Margaret knocked on Jeremiah's door that fateful afternoon, she carried with her a proposition that would sound absurd to most people. She offered to pay off his debts in full, saving his ranch from foreclosure, but with one condition that left him speechless. She wanted him to marry her, not out of love or romantic affection, but as a business arrangement that would benefit them both. She would gain the respectability and protection that marriage provided to women in that era, while he would keep his land and gain a partner who possessed both the financial resources and the business acumen to help him rebuild. Jeremiah's initial reaction was one of bewilderment and, if he were honest with himself, a touch of wounded pride. The idea of entering into a marriage of convenience with a woman he had just met seemed preposterous, especially when that woman was so different from the tall, sturdy ranch wives he had always imagined for himself. But as the reality of his situation sank in, and as he listened to Margaret's clear, logical explanation of her proposal, he began to understand the wisdom in her unconventional offer. Margaret explained that she had saved considerable money through years of careful living and shrewd investments, money that she had intended to use to purchase her own property and establish her own business. However, as a single woman of unusual appearance, she faced obstacles and prejudices that made such endeavors nearly impossible. By marrying Jeremiah, she would gain legal protection and social standing, while he would gain not only financial salvation, but also a partner whose sharp mind and business sense could help transform his struggling ranch into a profitable enterprise. The negotiation that followed was unlike any courtship in the annals of romance. They discussed terms and conditions with the precision of business partners, outlining their respective responsibilities and expectations. Margaret would provide the funds to settle all debts and finance the ranch's recovery, while Jeremiah would provide her with a home, protection, and the status of a married woman. They agreed that their relationship would be one of mutual respect and partnership, with neither party harboring illusions about love or passion, at least not initially. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small wooden church that served the scattered community. It was a modest affair, attended by a handful of neighbors who came more out of curiosity than celebration. The bride wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, altered to fit her petite frame perfectly, while the groom stood uncomfortably in his best suit, acutely aware of the stark difference in their heights and the whispered comments from the assembled guests. The townspeople's reaction to the marriage was predictably mixed. Some viewed it as a practical solution to both parties' problems, admiring the pragmatic approach to matrimony that was not uncommon on the frontier. Others saw it as somehow unseemly or inappropriate, their prejudices clouded by Margaret's physical appearance and the unconventional nature of the arrangement. The local gossips had a field day, speculating about the true nature of the relationship and making unkind comments about both the bride and groom. But Margaret and Jeremiah paid little attention to the whispers and stares. They had work to do, and the task before them was monumental. The ranch needed to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. New cattle had to be purchased, fences repaired, buildings renovated, and hands hired. Margaret threw herself into the challenge with an energy and enthusiasm that both surprised and impressed her new husband. She revealed herself to be not only an astute businesswoman, but also a natural organizer and leader. Within the first month of their marriage, Margaret had negotiated favorable deals with cattle suppliers, arranged for the hiring of experienced ranch hands, and established credit arrangements with local merchants that would have been impossible for Jeremiah to secure on his own. Her small stature was initially a source of skepticism among the rough men they hired, but her sharp wit, fair treatment, and obvious competence quickly earned their respect and loyalty. As the ranch began its slow recovery, something unexpected began to happen between Margaret and Jeremiah. What had started as a purely business relationship gradually evolved into something deeper and more meaningful. They discovered that they shared similar values about hard work, honesty, and the importance of building something lasting. Their evening conversations, initially focused solely on ranch business, began to range over a wider variety of topics, revealing depths of character and intellect that surprised them both. Margaret's knowledge extended far beyond what might be expected of a frontier woman. She had educated herself through voracious reading, and her travels had exposed her to ideas and perspectives that were uncommon in their isolated corner of Texas. She spoke passable Spanish, which proved invaluable in dealing with the Mexican vaqueros they hired, and her mathematical skills made her an excellent bookkeeper and financial planner. Jeremiah, for his part, revealed himself to be more thoughtful and sensitive than his gruff exterior might suggest, and his deep knowledge of the land and cattle impressed Margaret with its sophistication and nuance. The physical aspects of their unusual partnership also evolved in ways neither had anticipated. Initially, they had maintained separate bedrooms and treated each other with the formal courtesy of business partners. But as months passed and their mutual respect grew into genuine affection, the barriers between them began to lower. Their first kiss occurred 6 months after their wedding, during a moment of shared triumph when they learned that their first cattle drive had been enormously profitable. The success of the ranch continued to build throughout their first year of marriage. Margaret's business connections and financial acumen, combined with Jeremiah's ranching expertise and the quality of their land, created a synergy that exceeded their most optimistic projections. They expanded their operations, purchased additional property, and began to establish themselves as one of the most successful ranching operations in the region. But the most significant development was still to come. Margaret had never forgotten the information about potential oil deposits beneath their land, and she had been quietly researching the new drilling technologies that were beginning to revolutionize the industry. Using her network of contacts and her considerable powers of persuasion, she managed to interest a group of investors in funding an exploratory drilling operation on their property. The drilling began in the spring of their second year of marriage, much to the amusement and skepticism of their neighbors. The idea of finding oil in cattle country seemed absurd to most people, and many viewed the expensive drilling operation as evidence that Margaret's business sense wasn't as sharp as it appeared. Jeremiah himself harbored doubts about the venture, but he had learned to trust his wife's judgment in business matters, even when her ideas seemed unconventional or risky. The breakthrough came on a sweltering July morning when the drilling crew hit a pressurized pocket at a depth of 800 feet. The resulting gusher shot black crude oil high into the air, covering the drilling site and everyone nearby in the sticky, valuable substance. The discovery was even more significant than Margaret had dared to hope, revealing deposits that would eventually make the Hawthorne Ranch one of the wealthiest properties in Texas. The transformation that followed was dramatic and swift. The ranch that had once teetered on the edge of bankruptcy suddenly became the center of frenzied activity as oil companies competed for drilling rights and processing agreements. Margaret proved herself once again to be a shrewd negotiator, securing deals that preserved their ownership of the land while generating enormous ongoing revenues from the oil extraction. But success brought new challenges and complications. The influx of oil workers, speculators, and hangers-on disrupted the quiet rural life they had begun to cherish. Their neighbors' attitudes toward them shifted from condescension and pity to envy and resentment. Some people who had previously ignored or looked down upon Margaret now sought to curry favor with her, while others whispered that her success was somehow unnatural or undeserved. The couple found themselves navigating not only the complexities of sudden wealth, but also the social dynamics of a community that didn't quite know how to categorize or relate to them. Margaret's physical appearance, which had initially been a source of prejudice and discrimination, now made her the subject of a different kind of attention. Newspaper reporters came from as far away as Dallas and Houston to write about the unusual woman who had transformed a failing ranch into an oil empire. Through it all, Jeremiah and Margaret's relationship continued to deepen and mature. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had evolved into a genuine love story, though one unlike any that had been told before. They had learned to see past the superficial differences that had initially defined their relationship, and had discovered in each other partners who complemented and strengthened one another in ways neither had thought possible. Their success also allowed them to give back to their community in meaningful ways. They funded the construction of a new school, contributed to the expansion of the local church, and provided employment opportunities for dozens of families in the area. Margaret established a scholarship fund for young women who wanted to pursue education beyond what was traditionally available in frontier communities, while Jeremiah used his ranching expertise to help other local farmers and ranchers improve their operations. As their third wedding anniversary approached, Both Margaret and Jeremiah reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them together and transformed their lives. The arrangement that had seemed so unlikely and unconventional had proved to be one of the most successful partnerships in the history of their region. They had not only saved the ranch and built a fortune, but had also created a relationship based on mutual respect, shared goals, and eventually, deep love. The story of their marriage became legendary throughout Texas and beyond, inspiring other unconventional couples and challenging society's assumptions about what constituted a proper or successful marriage. Magazine articles and newspaper stories chronicled their rise from desperate circumstances to extraordinary wealth. But the reporters often missed the deeper story of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Even though neither had initially known what they were looking for, Margaret's influence extended beyond their immediate success. She became an advocate for other people who faced discrimination based on their appearance or circumstances, using her wealth and influence to support causes that promoted equality and opportunity. Her story inspired other women to pursue business ventures and financial independence, demonstrating that success was possible even for those who didn't fit society's conventional expectations. Jeremiah, meanwhile, discovered that his partnership with Margaret had made him not only a better businessman, but also a better person. Her perspective and experiences had broadened his understanding of the world and taught him to question assumptions he had never before examined. Their marriage had challenged him to grow in ways he had never imagined possible, transforming him from a struggling, solitary rancher into a confident, successful man who understood the value of true partnership. The oil wells continued to produce, the ranch operations thrived, and their personal relationship flourished. They eventually had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who inherited not only their parents' material success, but also their values of hard work, innovation, and acceptance of others, regardless of their differences. The family became a symbol of the American dream and the possibilities that existed for those willing to take risks and challenge conventional wisdom. The legacy of their partnership extended far beyond their immediate success and became a cornerstone story of the changing American West. As the oil industry grew and the railroad expanded across Texas, the Hawthorne Ranch became a hub of activity that attracted businessmen, investors, and entrepreneurs from across the country. Margaret's reputation as a shrewd negotiator and visionary businesswoman spread throughout the region, and she was frequently consulted by other landowners seeking to develop their properties. Their children grew up in an environment of prosperity and opportunity that would have been unimaginable during their father's darkest days. Young Thomas Hawthorne inherited his mother's sharp business mind and his father's deep connection to the land, eventually expanding the family operations into banking and real estate development. Their daughter, Elizabeth, followed in her mother's footsteps by becoming one of the first women to attend law school in Texas, using her education to advocate for the rights of people who faced discrimination based on their physical appearance or social circumstances. The town that had once whispered about the unusual marriage now proudly claimed the Hawthornes as their most famous residents. Streets were named after them, and the local historical society preserved artifacts and documents from their remarkable rise to prominence. The small wooden church where they had been married was eventually replaced by a grand stone building funded by their donations, complete with a plaque commemorating their wedding as one of the most significant events in local history. Margaret never forgot her humble beginnings or the struggles she had faced as a woman of unusual appearance, trying to make her way in an often hostile world. She established a foundation that provided financial support and educational opportunities for people who face similar challenges, creating a network of assistance that extended across multiple states. The foundation funded schools, hospitals and research facilities, but its most important contribution may have been the message it sent to society about the value and potential of every individual, regardless of their physical characteristics. The oil wells on the Hawthorne property continued to produce for decades, generating wealth that allowed the family to influence the development of the entire region. They invested in infrastructure projects that brought roads, telegraph lines, and eventually telephone service to previously isolated areas. Their vision for progress and development helped transform Central Texas from a collection of struggling ranches and small towns into a thriving economic region that attracted settlers and businesses from across the nation. As Margaret entered her later years, she became something of a celebrated figure in Texas society, invited to speak at women's clubs and business organizations throughout the state. Her speeches often focused on the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize the true potential in people and opportunities. She would tell audiences that her greatest success had not been in finding oil or building wealth, but in proving that unconventional partnerships could create extraordinary results when based on mutual respect and shared vision. Jeremiah, meanwhile, remained connected to the land that had shaped his character and defined his dreams. Even as their business empire expanded, he continued to maintain cattle operations on portions of their property, finding peace and satisfaction in the traditional ranching activities that had been his first love. He became a mentor to younger ranchers throughout the region, sharing the lessons he had learned about adapting to changing conditions and embracing unexpected opportunities for growth and improvement. Their marriage, which had begun as a desperate business arrangement, evolved into one of the great love stories of the frontier era. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a grand celebration attended by hundreds of guests, including governors, business leaders, and ordinary citizens whose lives had been touched by their generosity and example. The event was covered by newspapers across the country, and their story was held up as proof that America truly was a land of opportunity where anything was possible for those with courage and determination. The couple lived to see the dawn of the 20th century, witnessing transformations in technology, society, and business that exceeded even their ambitious dreams. The automobile replaced the horse. Electric lights illuminated the darkness that had once been broken only by oil lamps and candles, and communication systems connected their remote Texas ranch to markets and opportunities around the world. Through all these changes, Margaret and Jeremiah remained devoted partners, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining the values and principles that had guided their remarkable journey together. Years later, when writers and historians looked back on the remarkable story of Margaret and Jeremiah Hawthorne, they would struggle to categorize it within the traditional narratives of frontier life. It was simultaneously a tale of business success, social progress, and personal transformation. It challenged assumptions about marriage, appearance, and the nature of partnership, while demonstrating that sometimes the most unlikely combinations can produce the most extraordinary results. The broke rancher, who had married a dwarf woman to save his ranch, had indeed found salvation, but not in the way anyone had expected. He had discovered that true wealth lay not just in oil deposits and cattle herds, but in the partnership with someone who saw potential where others saw only problems, who brought wisdom where others brought prejudice, and who offered love where others offered only judgment. Together, they had built something far greater than either could have achieved alone, proving that the most powerful transformations often come from the most unexpected sources. If you enjoyed this incredible story from the Old West, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales of frontier life and the extraordinary people who shaped American history. In the comments below, tell us what you think was the most surprising aspect of Margaret and Jeremiah's story, and share your thoughts on how their unconventional marriage challenged the social norms of their time. What other unlikely partnerships from history would you like to hear about in future episodes?